Hey guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can create this big room daylight look using Flash in a very small space. Now I'm also going to show you how you can easily in Photoshop expand this space to create this large room effect. So I had a very small space, but you can see step by step I can extend that space. So then you've got an image that you can easily add a text overlay to, and it flows really nicely. I'm also going to show you how you can add natural looking highlights to enhance that natural look or the look of Venetian blinds as well. And you can even add a beautiful texture overlay to your image. So here's my setup here. It's a 2-light setup and it's a really small space that I'm working with. So I'm working with studio lights here, but this could easily be done with a couple of speed lights. So I have my large Elinchrom double diffused octabox camera left, and then using a boom camera right just on top of my model, I've got a tight grid. To light the image, what I'm using is like a light meter to get my lighting right. And so what you're doing is you measure one light at a time. So I'm measuring the octabox here, which is f8. And then the second light I measure is the grid spot, also f8. And so I'm lighting for the main light, and that's going to be the actual octabox, which is the highlight. And so my settings for this image are ISO 100, f8 at 1/200th of a second. So if you wanted to see this image before the actual lights are brought in, it's actually a black frame. Now, to achieve this natural daylight look, it's actually very crucial that I use something like a double diffused octabox. You could possibly use a large umbrella to get the same effect. So that's my main light. The second light is the octabox from overhead, and this is actually a very narrow beam of light, and it's a harder light, and that creates the beautiful highlights on the hair. And finally, I've used a large silver reflector camera right that's just opening up the shadows to the right of my model, and it just finishes off the overall look of this image. Now this is my first frame, and this is just taken with the Octa camera right. So this is a double diffused Octa, and basically I've just gone for a very simple Rembrandt-esque type of lighting, but you can see the difference in this image compared to my final image where I've got the hair light and the extra fill light in this image. Another thing I want to point out is how important wardrobe is to the overall look of your image. So it's something that you want to carefully consider, and check out this the next image where we change from the pink t-shirt to the singlet. Suddenly the image all came together and it just works, and the hair was adjusted. These are all the little 1%ers that you want to really think about before you take your final shots. So once I'm happy with the lighting and the wardrobe, everything's looking good. It's just a matter of taking several images and just slightly tweaking the facial expression. So it's all about connection, and the direction for this is to just like make the face either softer or harder and have a thought behind the eyes. Once all that's done, I clear the set and lock off my focus. So if I'm shooting autofocus, I change that focus to manual focus. And once the set is clear, I take a clean plate, and that's for the background, and that's how I'm going to be able to edit out the lights in this frame. This is a crucial step, very important to make sure that you keep the same focal plane. And basically I've moved the lights out, but I've kept them on so that the wall is lit in a very similar style, but the lights are still in the frame. All right, so to edit the image, I've selected my final choice here, and I've just done some minor adjustments. So color balance, and I've just opened up the shadows a titch and added some blacks, and that's it. So what I need to do now is I have my main image selected, and I've also got my background image selected. So what I'm going to do is highlight both of those, right click, edit in, and go down to open as layers in Photoshop. This will come up in Photoshop now, and Photoshop will open those two images and put them on top of each other in layers. Now, what you want to do is make sure that you've got your hero image on the top and the background image on the bottom. So once they're in, it's important that you check that the two images are lined up perfectly, because this is going to impact how your image looks. So what I like to do is just drop the opacity and check again, and these two both look pretty good here. Okay, so next up, what I'm going to do is add a layer mask. So it's that little icon there. And then what I need is a brush. I'm going to make sure that it's 0 hardness, so nice soft brush. My blend mode is normal, opacity 100%, and we'll get the flow somewhere around 50, somewhere around there. That looks good. All right, so you want to make sure that black is your foreground color and that you've got the mask highlighted, and then basically just start brushing over the lights there. So basically, because we've got this layer mask, black reveals what's underneath and white hides. So I'm just going to carefully go around, and basically I'm removing the lights to reveal the blank empty layer that's underneath. All right, so I just work my way around. I'll do the other side there. Now you'll notice that the color temperature of my background wall is ever so slightly different to the actual edit of my hero shot. You can see it's got, my hero shot has a little bit more blue in it. So I'm gonna tackle that. I'll just keep getting rid of these little lights here and my reflector, get rid of everything that I can, just go around slowly with that soft brush, tackling all the areas down the side there. Just take your time. You can actually trace around your model if you want to, but generally I find this works really well. If you make a mistake and you go too far, just change your foreground color to white and go the other way. So there we go. We got before and after. As you can see, that sits in well. Let's tackle the color problem now. So I'm going to go down to a new adjustment layer, a new color adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of cyan to my underneath layer, and that should adjust those color issues. That should help me with that. And that's looking pretty good right there. Okay, now I could easily finish this image off there and be happy with it. But I always talk about these little 1%ers. And so this final image wasn't exactly what I had in my mind's eye. And I was restricted by the size of a space I was working in. And the thing that I don't like about this image is how it doesn't flow the way I would like it. Now, I've got my model too far in the center of the frame, and I couldn't move my camera any more camera left because there was lots of guff over this side, and I wanted more head space. To me, this image feels really tight and really constricted. It's like too closed in. I wanted more space around him. So if you don't have the large studio space, and this is such a common dilemma, you know, I spent so many years going to green rooms in TV stations, which were honestly the size of bedrooms, and I've shot in bedrooms for editorial shoots, and you never get the size that you want. The spaces are always smaller, so we need to learn to adapt to these spaces. So if we can't have the large space that we want, we get what we can, and then we learn to adapt and adjust the image in post. And so this is a technique that I've developed that I think works really well. So basically, what I'm going to do is increase the canvas size of the image first. Now, you need to make sure that you've got the bottom layer selected, and you go down to canvas size, and there are a couple of ways to do this. So you get this little dialog box that comes up, and you can adjust the width and height. All right, so let's just say I want to adjust this to 30 inches wide by 20 inches high, and I leave it at the default. What Photoshop will do is it will add a border around the image. So now I've expanded the image. All right, so you can see that I've expanded the image on all 4 sides of my frame. And this is the problem here, because I don't want to increase it on all 4 frames. I actually want to increase it camera left and at the top. So if I go back to image, canvas size, bring up my dialog box, and you'll notice that you've got all these arrows. Now, if I click on the bottom right side arrow and put in the same parameters, so 30 inches by a height of 20 images, what I'm essentially telling Photoshop is, yes, I want to increase my canvas size, but only at the top and left of frame. So now you'll see that now I've got that 30 by 20 frame. However, this time it's only increased camera left and on the top. So you can control how you increase your canvas size. All right, so once I'm happy with my canvas size, I need to work out a way to fill in these areas to replicate the wall camera left and up here on the top of the frame. And the best way to use this, the best tool in Photoshop, I believe, is the new content aware fill. So there are 2 detailed tutorials. If you've never used the content aware fill tool, there are 2 really detailed tutorials that take you through this. So I'm going to sort of go through this fairly quickly, but if you're not following along, I suggest you check out the refreshers, and I'll link to those in the blog post notes for this tutorial. So first thing you want to do is switch off this top layer so that you've just got that background selected. So I'm going to leave the color balance layer, and I'm going to have the background there. And then what I want to do is select that bottom layer there. So I'm telling Photoshop, this is where I want you to look. And then what I need to do is select this area. And the quickest way to do that is just use the magic wand, hover in this new canvas area, All right, and just click that and you can see those marching ants. Now I've selected that whole area in Photoshop. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying to Photoshop, this is the area that I need you to fill with this area here, and I want you to make it look like I've expanded I took a larger photo than is seen here on the screen. So we go down to Edit, Content Aware Fill, and a little dialog box is going to come up. Now, the pink overlay is the area that Photoshop on its own, the AI that it's used on its own is saying, okay, these are the areas that we need to look at, and the areas that aren't highlighted in pink are where there are different tones that Photoshop believes are just confusing, so it hasn't included those in the area. So it's basically using this pink area here So it's using this pink area here to create this image here. And you can see it looks pretty good, but there is this dark section here. I'm going to hit OK to show you what that looks like. And I'll deselect the selected area. So Command D is the shortcut for that. And you can see it's done a really good and you can see it's done a really good job at adding to the top of the frame, not so good a job here on the side of the frame. So what I've found is I think that if you overwhelm Photoshop at the start, it gets a bit confused with this content aware fill and it doesn't do a great job. So there is actually a better workaround. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this. Okay, so I've still got this extra canvas selected, and what I'm going to do instead is do a little bit at a time. So I'm going to select my rectangular marquee tool, so it's this little icon here, and what I'm going to do to start with is I'm just going to do the top of the frame. And what I also like to do is just overlap a smidge, so I'll come in so you can see I've come into the frame a little bit. I think that helps with Photoshop selection. So I'm saying, okay, actually I'm going to do a better job here. Let me deselect that and let me just line it up. There we go, that's better here. Just come into the frame a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to do the top section first, and I find that doing it in sections is gives you a much better result. So Edit, Content Aware Fill, and so opacity is 100%. I've got my color overlay is pink, and the sampling options, you've got a choice. You can do auto, which is Photoshop decides for you, or custom, you can tell Photoshop the areas that you want to replicate, but I think auto in this instance looks really good. All right, so, and you can see that it's done a much better job at adding to this top part of the frame. So I'm going to commit to that and hit OK and deselect that. And I'm pretty happy with how that looks. It hasn't botched it up quite as well. A bit dodgy here on the side, but we'll fix that now. And you can see that it actually adds it as a new layer. All right, so what I'm going to do is with this new layer selected, I'm actually going to now merge these two layers, top and bottom, and actually the color balance layer. So I'm going to go to this one. These three layers, I'm going to merge them all up onto their own separate layer. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit Command, Option, Alt on a Windows, Shift E is the shortcut. And that has now popped all of that up onto its own empty layer. So if I turn these off, you can see that it's just, this is the new layer here. So I've basically merged these layers. All right, so now we're working from this layer here, and I'm going to repeat the exercise with this part here on camera left, and making sure I just come in a little bit more beyond this little dodgy part here that Photoshop has done. Okay, so I've got that selection, so I'm telling Photoshop, hey, this is the area that I need to fill. I come down to Edit, Content Aware Fill, and I've got all my default settings come up. I'm at Auto, and I think it's done a beautiful job already. I can see that that's managed to rebuild that wall beautifully. So hit OK and turn off my Marquee tool, and it's done a really good job, except for just this bottom edge here, and that's just a matter of my masking, but I can easily crop that out. So you can see that now I've created a really beautiful looking room, and it looks like this was shot from scratch. Now, a couple of little issues here. I've got a little bit of ghosting here, so what I can do is create a new empty layer, and I can just come in with the clone stamp, nice big brush, and I can just sort of brush over that and tackle any other little faults that you might see. But aside from that, I think it looks pretty good. So that's what I did just there. I just got rid of that little highlight there. So that is looking great. Now I can add my model back in, and we can see that there's just the edges of the layer mask are visible. So what I can come is click on my layer mask here, and I'm just going to clean up those edges. So you can see if I zoom in, you can just see the edge of the original frame with the new frame, and the edge of the original frame here. So I'm just going to now come in with black as my foreground color, just mask out those. All right, and just blending in those areas. I can make my brush a little bit bigger. And now pretty much I've created a lovely, I've increased that canvas size, and I think it looks really good. So now I've gone from having a really small and tight frame to having something that feels a lot more spacious, and I can then, if I wanted to, I could add a little bit more to this side and crop into the left, and just have lots of negative space. And you could also really build a huge room if you wanted to, and make the figure really small. There's so much you can do with this technique. So that's using content aware fill. Now we can take this a couple of other levels now, and what I want to do first is show you how to add texture to the walls. Right, so to add texture to this image, it's fairly simple to do, but what we've got to bear in mind is I want to add texture to scale, so that I've got this corner set going on here, and it's not just a matter of placing texture on top. It's not going to look right. So I want to do it to scale and also to perspective, and this is going to add a little bit of character to the walls, and it adds depth and interest. So what I need to do is, and the texture I'm using is out of the texture pack that you can download in the Gold Member Resources section. So to add the texture, what I'm going to do is go to File, Place Embedded, all right? And you'll get a little dialog box that comes up, and you can actually scroll through and find the texture that you want. So I'm using texture number 9 from the Gold Members Texture Pack. And so once I've found it, hit Place, and Photoshop will place that on top of the layers there. And the reason that I choose Place Embedded rather than copy and paste or drag and drop is that, we'll commit to that, it loads it as a smart object. And the reason that you want a smart object to work with is that no matter how much I play around with this and size it and resize it, it's always going to remain, it won't diminish in quality. So, and it's also, I can directly edit this texture layer however many ways I want, and then I can go back at a later date and always be able to edit it. So I think it's a superior way when you're working in layers to use place embedded, so that you get your layer added as a smart object. All right, so we'll hit OK. Now, I've now got the layer on top, and what I want to do is I want to place this textured wall into this section here, and I want to do it to scale and to perspective. So what I need to do is be able to transform this wall, and so what I need to do that is make sure that I've got my move tool selected, and with the texture layer selected, what I'm going to do is I can come down to edit, transform, and hit distort. All right, and you'll see that I've got a couple of extra bounding boxes here. And now what I can do is I can grab any one of these handles and move them and place them in perspective into that wall. So basically I'm just grabbing each of the corners and I'm placing them in line with the original wall. Okay, now this one's a little bit harder, so I need to kind of extend the handles outside of the image, and then I can come in and just fine tune that so that it's sitting on the wall, and just make sure that that's looking all right. And come up here and just straighten that. Okay. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to commit to that, hit OK. All right. So there it is. It's in perspective, but obviously it's not looking fantastic because it's sitting on top of everything. So what I can do now is change my blend mode from normal to overlay or soft light. I think overlay looks better, and you can actually change, like vivid light gives you a much sharper, contrastier look. But I think in this instance, overlay is the best one. So let's toggle on and off. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and I'm going to repeat the process for the camera right hand side. So to do that, I'm going to hit File, Place Embedded, toggle through to the folder that you've got the textures. I'm going to use the same texture again, so it's texture number 9 from the gold texture pack. Hit Place. All right, and there it is. Now I go to Edit, Transform, Distort, and now I can grab these little handles. So these little boxes all on the sides, little handles that you can move once you're in that distort mode, and I can place those in perspective there. So I just start with lining them up. Roughly at first. And let me just get this one in here, lined up along there. All right, and then I can come in and just scroll in and fine tune that. Oh. Just make sure it's all lining up where it should be. And once I'm happy with that, hit OK. And again, change my blend mode to overlay, hit OK. Now, you're going to notice that this is also, the texture is on my model. So to clean that up, I'm just going to add a little layer mask to that. Select black as my foreground color, brush, blend mode, normal, 0 hardness, opacity 100%, start with a low flow, reduce my brush size, and I'm just using the brackets, so you can use the brackets to make your brush bigger or smaller, or you can manually adjust the size here. All right, so just get a sort of a good size there, and I can come in here and just clean up the texture that's on the body, because obviously I don't want texture on the body, I just want it on the outline. And so now you can, if you want to take your time and do this properly, you can probably just come in and mask your figure, but this way of adding texture is so forgiving that you can actually just do it, you know, using a brush if you want to just save a bit of time. And if you make a mistake, just change your foreground color to white and just brush over that. So you can just toggle from white to black and just clean up your image where you want to add texture or remove it. And so we can see if I disable my layer mask, that's before and that's after. So now I've got lovely texture on both those walls and not on my figure. So I've added a bit of I don't know, depth to the image. Now, one thing I notice here is because I've used the same texture on both walls, the marks are replicated, so that looks obvious. So what I'm going to do is new empty layer, just get my spot healing brush, make sure that sample all layers is selected, and just come in and clean up some of those like little matchy spots so that it actually looks like this is different texture here and it's not the same on both sides. There you go. So that makes, I think that looks pretty good, and it's just added a little bit of depth to the wall. And of course, because we've got that blend mode there, I've managed to maintain the beautiful shadows, and I've created this sort of textured wall look where it was just, before it was just flat and white. So and I just noticed, I'll just clean up this little area here under his arm as well. Make sure that black is my foreground color. So just clean up there. All right, and you'll notice there's a few spots there, okay? So if you're doing it on your own, for reals, just make sure that you spend a bit of time cleaning all that up as well. Okay, so that's that. Now, finally, I want to add some more depth to this image. So I want to show you how you can add sunlight, by both real sunlight and also the way you do it with Photoshop. All right, and finally I want to show you how you can add like little splashes of light just to add more depth and give the image more daylight feel. And I've got this daylight overlay, and this is actually an actual image I shot of daylight, and I've added that to the overlaid that to the image, or I've created some Venetian blinds in Photoshop. So I'll show you how to do both of those. So with the overlay, basically what I did is after I'd finished the shoot, the sun was setting and it created these beautiful highlights, but I'd already moved all the lights out of the shot. But I actually did take a shot of the sun creating these highlights and shadows, and you can see the reflections, you know, the shadows from plants and things. So basically, these are great. Start collecting them. So whenever you see a white wall and you might see windows, the light on the walls from the windows or plants, start photographing them because they make fantastic overlays. So here's one that basically what I did is I just cropped it, adjust the white balance to take out all the color temperature. So I'll show you the before. Here's the before, here's the after. So basically all I've done is just taken the color and lightened it a bit, and so now I can export that and save it as a JPEG, and I can use it as an overlay. So I'll show you how to do that now. So I've got my image. So what I do is select the top layer. All right, and to add this highlight overlay, basically same technique as adding the texture overlay. So store the file in a folder where you know you can easily access it. File, place embedded. Okay, and here's my sunlight. Select and hit place, and there it is. Now I can see that it's a little bit too big. What I want to do is just reduce the opacity so I can see what's going on underneath, and I can what I want to do is, because I actually shot in the same room, I've got it already where it's I line it up so the corners of the room are lined up, and then I've already got the highlights there in perspective, and I can hit OK. Change my opacity back to 100%, and I'm going to change my blend mode again to overlay. Now you can see that now this is way too strong, so all I need to do is reduce the opacity. Okay, something like that, and you can see that it does a really good job, but you can also see the edges here of the overlay. So to fix that, all I need to do is add a layer mask. So it's that little icon there. Make sure that black is my foreground color. Nice soft brush, zero hardness, blend mode normal, opacity 100%, nice low flow, nice big brush. And basically what I'm going to do is just brush over the edges so that it all blends in. And so basically I've just got these little dooks, these little spots of highlight there on the image. And I'm also just going to reduce my brush size, and you can see where it's sitting on the model's face. That's probably a bit much, so I can just come and brush over there and just reduce it. So the idea with the grid is to make it look like that's the actual light that's reflecting is not really hitting the face, but more the hair and on the back wall, and it's kind of lighting my model as well. So that's the idea, and it adds a little splash of light, and I think it gives it depth and interest. So these are really handy to have. So even if you just go outside and get a white bed sheet, or like a flat sheet, and hang it on your background stand or something, and or hang it in a room where you've got, you know that you've got Venetian blinds, and you get beautiful patterns from the sun onto the walls, you can capture that onto a white sheet and start collecting these little highlights and start adding them as overlays as well as textures. So I think it looks really good. It adds a certain depth. So that's that one. Now, how about this Venetian, adding these Venetians? So this, now you can add any shape you want to add depth to the wall. All right, so what we do is we need a new empty layer. So this little icon here. So I've got my empty layer selected. I'm going to use my Marquee tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a little Venetian look. So I'm creating the little slats here using the Marquee tool, and I'm just creating a long, narrow rectangle. So you can see that there. And then I want to fill that with white. So edit, fill, little drop down menu. You've got all different selections. I fill it with 50% grey, black, patterns, background color. I'm going to choose white, blend mode normal, opacity 100%, and hit OK. Now, I could repeat this exercise and continue to add more stripes. I can duplicate the layer and create that, or I'm going to show you a shortcut. So if I want to create lots of little rectangles that all look the same, what I can do is the shortcut is Command Option T, and that now copies that layer. And what I can do is now drag it down, okay, to where with the space that I want it. All right, and now, so commit to that. If I hit Command Option on a Mac, Alt on a Windows, Shift T, it just replicates that. So now all I need to do is, because I've recorded that first step with the exact gap, if I now, every time I hit Command, Option, Alt on a Windows, Shift T, it'll just continue to create the same spacing and the same size little Venetian slats. All right, Command, Option, Shift T. Command, Option, Alt if you're using a Windows. So it's, if you're using a Windows, it's Command, Alt, Shift T. All right, and I can just keep doing that all the way down, and I've created my little pretend Venetians here. And there it is there. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I've got the whole selection selected, and going back to remember how we put the textures here in perspective, I can now do the same thing for my Venetian sunlight that's going to be hitting the wall, because it wouldn't be hitting it square on, because you can see that the wall's going, it's at an angle here. So what I can do is edit, transform, distort, okay? And now I can actually use my little handles here. Actually make sure I've got the wrong layer selected. So I want it to be this layer here. All right. So edit, transform, distort. All right. And now what I can do is grab these little handles, and I can now make this look like it's distorted in perspective. All right. So just lining up. So I like to line up my verticals and horizontals. And so you can now see how this little Venetian blind sunlight is now in perspective with that back wall. Okay, so once I'm happy with how that looks, hit OK. So it doesn't look great now. It's like, obviously it just looks like white bars that are sitting on the wall. But if I change the blend mode to overlay or soft light, looks even better. Now it's starting to look a little bit better, but it can still look better still. So what I want to do is, I don't think it's should be that quite that bright. So I'm going to change the opacity to about 60%. And if we look at an actual like sunlight for reals, you can see that it's not sharp. It's got some blur to it. So this is actual sunlight here, and it gives us an idea of what it looks like. So if I go back to my Venetians, they're very sharp. So what I want to do is add some blur to this image. So if I actually transfer this to a convert this to a smart object, this means that I can continue to edit this layer, and I can come back at a later date if I need to and continue to edit. So I'll always convert your layers to smart objects, and they'll be easier to edit later on. So now I'm going to come into Filter, Blur, Blur Gallery, and I'm going to choose Field Blur. And you get this little dialog box. The one that you want to be concerned with, this is this top one. I'm just going to add some blur. That's too much. I think somewhere around there looks good. Hit OK. And there you have it. So toggle on and off. I've got my Venetian light hitting the window, and you can see that I can actually, because I've converted this to a smart object, I can actually, if I want to, I could edit the blur gallery. So if I just double click on that, I can play around with the density, I can feather it, or I can actually adjust the blur itself. So that's the advantage of working with the smart objects there. But you can see that that has created a nice little Venetian look. It spills onto the clothes as well. Again, if you want to remove some of it, just add a layer mask. Make sure that black is your foreground color, and if I don't want it to show up quite as much on the shoes, I can just brush it back there, and so but you can see how that adds a lot of depth. So there you go. That's taking a very tight space and creating a much larger space, adding texture, adding depth with light. And you can really take what could have been a very simple, flat-looking shot, lighting it to look like daylight, and then adding these little elements to just take that to the next level.